This is the third lecture on nature, and we are pairing two books, the Portable Thoreau and the I Ching. In order to have an insight into the I Ching, I'd like to quote from my translation of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu's book, Chapter 14, Praising the Profound. Here's how I translated the Chinese of Lao Tzu. He says, looking itself not seen. That means the looking function itself is not seen. We see the objects, but we do not see the looking. The carrier process is invisible in terms of criterion of objectivity. Our actions in this world are objective. They can be seen. But the doing of those actions is invisible and not seen, but real. The Tao is in the doingness. The Te is in what is seen. So Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, chapter 14, Praising the Profound, speaks in this way. I tried to use English in a way consonant with Lao Tzu's Chinese. If Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago was using our English, I think he would speak in this way. Looking itself not seen, named thus colorless. Listening itself not heard, named thus soundless. Grasping itself not tenable, named thus incorporeal. These three themselves not can be, subject objectivity. Therefore, twined yet busy unity, its surface not clear, its bottom not obscure, continuously, oh, not can name, reverts, returns to no thing existence. This called no form itself, the form of no image, itself image. This form abstrusely abstruse. The front itself not seen its head, the rear itself not seen its back, holding fast ancient itself Tao, thereby govern now its existence, thus no ancient beginning. This is called Tao's thread. And in this way, in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu gives us a perpendicular angle into the I Ching. The I Ching is a very mysterious volume. It reminds me of a definition of a book given by an American poet in the 1940s, Kenneth Pachin. He said, a book is a box for keeping all journeys. And in fact, Pachin wrote a book which was like a box, and you could open it up and all the pages and things were loose leaf, and on the pages there were different images that could be rearranged. The I Ching is a box in which all journeys can be kept. All linear threads of development can be kept. They are kept in what is called, in modern mathematics, a matrix. a matrix, so that we can use this kind of language today. Nature is a matrix of free variables. If you recall, Walt Whitman in Democratic Vistas, written trying to bring Lincoln's vision back out of death into life again, said nature seems to respect only two conditions, freedom and variability. This is what she likes. She likes freedom and variability. Nature is a matrix of free variables, zero-based set, boundless. And the Chinese call that Tao. We can call it Tao. Next to that, ritual is a pattern of linear repeatables, unity-based set, bounded, and the Chinese call that Te. Now the earliest translators, like Arthur Waley, called that power. They used the English term power. That Te means power. Sometimes it was translated as virtue. The same people who translated Plato's Greek term arete as virtue translated Te as virtue. Plato's arete and Lao Tzu's Te are very similar. It doesn't mean virtue. That has Victorian connotations. There's nothing culturally virtuous about Te or arete. They occur in existence before anything that could be identified as culture has a chance to form. Te, like arete in Plato, is primordial existence. It's what the existentialists like Kierkegaard would say is ex-stance. It stands out from its standing. And so existence occurs and is the first objectivity. And we will see that what we do, the actual action, is where existence comes into being. That nature has no existence. Nature does not exist. It is a faux pas of language. It is a fault of projection. It is a psychological anthropomorphism to say that nature exists. Nature is a matrix of change that happens before existence can occur. And there being no objectivity to nature, the only thing that one can say about it is that it is mysterious. Nature is neither comic nor tragic, but mysterious. Nature is a mystery. The old Chinese icon of contemplating the Tao are three sages in the mountains under a pine tree looking at a diagram of the Tai Chi and peering at it as if peering into a mysteriousness. Praising the profound, looking itself not seen, listening itself not heard, grasping itself not tenable. In the Tao, there's no way to hold anything because there's no graspability anywhere. There's no listenability. There's no lookability. So that the real, in the I Ching, is quite different from any other quality which we are familiar with. Te is the movement of Tao. When zero moves, one occurs. When nothing activates, unity is real. So that one can say that the relationality between Tao and Te is a relationality between rest and movement. Expressed just simply like this. The Tao of my gesture is unseen. What you see when the hand moves in this way is Te. That I know this is Te is my Gen. My human-heartedness, my pivot, my reality is that I may move my hand in Te. But what moves my Te at the pivot is my resonance with Tao. Because of what I've called grandfather phasing, or grandmother phasing if you like. There is a sine wave, like an electric tilde, that occurs as the symbol of energy in movement. When energy moves, momentum itself can be characterized by this sine wave. And the apex, the zenith, and the nadir are pairs which are resonant. Pairs which are resonant. The Te is the sine wave that has these pairs in parallel, so that the energy occurs in its wholeness, in its fullness. The Tao is the median line which can never be seen and which does not occur because when you collapse an energy wave out of its tilde, out of its sine wave, when you collapse an energy wave to its event horizon, it disappears. And we have to go to India to find an adequate word for this. India is the only place that ever found an adequate word for this. You see, the Chinese always began with 0. And so through the Chinese, Tao was the reality that they worked with. But in India, they always began with the unity, with the oneness. And so India developed metaphysics, whereas China developed mystery. The Chinese character is mysterious at its finest. The Indian character is metaphysical at its fineness. And in Indian metaphysical language, the word that they found for this vanishing point is bindu. B-I-N-D-U, bindu. When one does a yoga, a classical yoga, the integration proceeds in its infolding implosion, its orderly implosion, its infoldingness to a single point which vanishes in upon itself. That vanishing point is bindu. It is what we would call in modern physics an event horizon. It's the event horizon of the zero base Tao. A black hole is a cosmic bindu. This quality, this metaphysical quality, to be able to imagine and to language a vanishing point and name it bindu, is paired in the Indian capacity, for they have found the word for the penultimate form just before the collapse into vanishing. And that word was Om. Om. So that we can say this. And I'll just run through this, and we can make copies of this for you for next week. Nature is a matrix of free variables, zero-based set, boundless, Tao. Ritual is a pattern of linear repeatables, unity-based set, bounded, Te. Culture is a function of Te. The mask is the pivot of culture. Nature can be integrated back to its zero-base origin, Bindu. Integration is the energy mode of cultural man, whereas differentiation is the dynamic mode of civilized man. And then we'll get to that next year. Integration, differentiation. Two distinct modes. One is a cultural mode, the other is the mode of civilization. Language is the vehicle of man's integration. The symbol is the integral function of language. The word is the penultimate symbol. Example, Om. So that, using a Lao Tzu quality, one could say, therefore, nature can be expressed in symbols to an integral language culture. If you have a culture that is formed in the integral mode and functioning with a symbolic skeleton, then these symbols will choreograph to the point of consonance any activity in the culture. You could literally have a culture as sound as a bell, so that any activity in the culture rings the entire form of the culture. That's what we popularly call togetherness. When a people is unified to that extent that any activity in that culture rings the bell form of that culture, and one can literally hear that what you are doing is not only proper, but real. Because the criteria of a culture is not simply that things be proper, but that they be real. Men and women have never been stupid about the basics that are necessary. One does a ritual for the rising of the sun, not simply to get the ritual right, but so the sun will rise. These symbols, then, we will find choreograph. That's the best word I can find. They don't integrate, they choreograph. They choreograph constantly activity in the culture. Myth is the resonant choreography of symbols into ritual. Myth is a parallel process to nature, a pair braided. Symbols are a paired objectivity to ritual, but obverse related. Now we've got a whole year to be able to understand this. And we can make copies of it, and we will, and we'll get to it. We'll get to all of it. We need an image at this point in order to give ourselves some kind of objectivity, because we're going to feel the floatingness. And so, prematurely, I'll give you an objectivity, an image. And once we have the image, we'll just set it aside. Since ritual action is the first objectivity, and since ritual must come out of the mysterious flux of nature, the primordial pattern of ritual is the registering of what is real in nature for us. Now you can amend this, you can put an asterisk. If you want to jump the gun, you can say, because we are transformable, we can pull more out of nature than initially we do. But initially, what we bring out of nature is what is capable of being objectively acted upon by us, and thus is our first criterion of existential reality. The first overall pattern of ritual is the ritual year. This happens on any particular planet, in any particular star system. Whatever the year is, if we were Martians, our year would be 637 days. We're here, our ritual year is 365 and a quarter days. The ritual year is a circle which takes the linearity, and nature, by its convex mysteriousness, allows for the linearity to appear, to bend around and come into a circle. Man does not make the circle of the year. God makes that circle. What man does is maintain his linearity, and he observes that his linearity curves around and comes back to itself. And that it does this continuously and always is the first objectivity that comes out of the mystery of nature. And primordial man, and I'm talking about before our species was here, before Homo sapiens was here, before Homo neanderthals, as far back as at least Homo erectus 2 million years ago, this registered in the way in which activity was real for those primordial hominid ancestors of ours. That any activity maintained with dedication and tenacity will, by some mysterious process, come back upon itself. It's not an intellectual formulation of something like Eliade's myth of eternal return. That's a wonderful intellectual formulation. And if you read Eliade's myth of the eternal return, the last chapters are all about the terror of history, because his book is about differential civilization. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the mysterious quality that if a being maintains a disciplined line in nature, it eventually curves back all by itself and reoccurs. That our dedication to maintaining the arrow-straight, disciplined linearity results in a circle, a patterned circle of activity, is the most amazing objectivity that comes out of the mystery of nature. So that a circle is not man's emblem, but God's emblem of what is real. When one sees the great archaeoastronomical observatory of Stonehenge, made about 4,500 years ago, that circle of blue stone, monolithic slabs set in its circle, they're not just placed there by man's understanding of a circle, they're placed there by man's understanding of linearity. That linearity comes full round into some kind of ordinal mystery is due to God, not to man. Now, primordial men and women experienced this, understood this. So that the whole purpose of ritual, of keeping a ritual exact, is not the later anthropological, sociological projection that men and women were stupid and therefore out of some kind of savage fear that they kept towing ritual lines because they didn't want to color outside the lines because they were fearful, stupid, dull. All of that is rather flawed thinking and untrue. There were courageous men and women who understood if we maintain our linearity, God will bring us full round and life will occur again. And that is what we will discover when we go into ritual in the next season. Right now we're in nature, and so let's set that aside. Let's set aside the mysteriousness that occurs. Out of seeming qualities of just registering the mystery of what happens, one observes there's a geometricity and there's a quality of thusness, and existence comes into being. What can we say? Let's go back to the notes of the first lecture. The first sentence, the first phrase, the first lecture on New Year's Day, early concepts are tricky to use. Primordial realizations of man are very tricky for us to use because we have a built-in cultural skew that obviates the originality of the experience. And we have a complicating diffusion quality of differentiation that comes into play, which literally has to be combed out of the way. Most meditation techniques, most contemplation techniques are the combing of differentiation out of the integral mode. When you hear someone colloquially say that one goes into a samadhi and develops a certain energy mind, which can be recorded on equipment, it means that someone through discipline has combed the differentiation out of the mix and is in the pure integration mode. And someone who becomes adept, if we can use that term, at meditation will eventually be able to generate existence in its primordiality. And that existence, when it is allowed to become more primordial, disappears into a mystery. 180 degrees the other way, when the discipline is raised to a high enough integral, one experiences the symbolic infolding to the point of vanishing, so that there's mystery at both ends. There's mystery at the beginning, and there's mystery at the culmination, at the vanishing point. But just before the vanishing point, language implodes to the power of a word. So that in the most sophisticated yoga ever developed on this planet, that yoga of Patanjali, was a contemporary of Plotinus. I did a lecture once on Plotinus and Patanjali. Manly Hall wanted to have a statement on that, and I did a Sunday lecture at the Philosophic Research Society one time on that. Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, his yoga aphorisms, calls that word pranama, that penultimate word pranama. And so a yogi who is able to integrate to the point of a single word just before the vanishing point can take that word and can apply it anywhere on the integral chain And by applying that word and the integral chain, he can rearrange the elements into any order that he wishes. So that if you read Patanjali, he talks about applying pranama on all the different levels, the different orders, the different sets of integration. And that one can change the basis upon which the integration has happened. Which is to say this: one can develop the power of integration so that it can rearrange the elements in their sets and orders so that the integration literally becomes perfected. The first time that one goes through a meditation cycle to the point of being able to get down to that level called the Word, they used to call Jesus the Word. The integration is all done on a natural basis. But through running this through a recurrent cycle, one can perfect the entire series so that one's integration becomes perfected. And when one enters Bindu in a perfected integral mode, one comes through that with the entire field of integration completely intact, enfolded into the invisibleness. This makes the power of egos look like sand play. Let's come back. Lecture number 1, Nature 1. First sentence: early concepts are tricky to use. Primordial ideas are very difficult for us to use. We have a differential mode that compromises them. We have misconceptions that are projected on them. We have cultural biases, psychological skews, sociological fogs, all kinds of problems. This education cycle is meant to pass through all of those complications. You don't have to trouble yourself about the intellectuality, about understanding, about the struggle. Your struggle is simply to show up. If you show up, I'll be here in the form of this work, and it will do the job. And the second year, we'll undo the hair and let it all hang out. Early concepts are tricky to use. They are numinous. To use the term that Rudolf Otto and the idea of the holy used, that Jung appropriated. Early concepts, primordial ideas, are numinous. They're not phenomenon, but they're noumenon. And here's a difference. The objectivity of ritual are phenomena. The objectivity of symbols are noumena. So that the phenomena and the noumena are a pair. They go together, just like a pair. But they're an obverse pair. The more you do the one, the less the other is there. The more you do the other, the less this is there. The way the I Ching talks about this kind of obverse relationality is yin and yang. Yin and yang are always together. But the more one looks to the yang, the less one sees the yin. The more one looks to the yin, the less one sees of the yang. But they are always together, always in this obverse relationality. So that the ratio of the real to a Taoist is yin-yang. Yin-yang. And yin-yang, that ratio, when it moves in an energy cycle which has 5 phases. The movement of yin-yang, the ratio yin-yang in its movement has a 5-phase energy cycle. Tao, Te, Zhen, Yi, Li. So that when you take the matrix of that pair moving in a 5-phase cycle, one says of this in Chinese that this is the 10 heavenly stems. The 10 heavenly stems. But because in the middle, where we are, where we occur, because we are primordially a pair, so primordial that we are a pair of pairs, so that yin-yang for us is not simply yin-yang, but yin-yang doubled. So while there are 10 heavenly stems, you have to double the center for us. And so for man, for earth, there are 12 earthly branches. So that the matrix of what is real to a Taoist, 10 heavenly stems paired with 12 earthly branches. The 12 earthly branches with the 5-phase energy cycle will make a 60-part 3-dimensional matrix, or 4-dimensional matrix. Better to say 4-dimensional here, time-space. So that the 60-part matrix is primordial to the Chinese sense of what is universal and what is real. 60 is called sexagenary. So that the Taoist sense of universal wholeness moves in terms of 60s. It's curious, parallel, that Western sense of time should be 60 seconds, 60 minutes. It is very, very, very interesting. The 5 times 12 is 60. 6 times 10 is also 60. So that the mediating 60-part matrix accepts a 5 times 12 and the other part of the pair, a 6 times 10. The 6 comes from the hexagrams of the I Ching. And the hexagrams relate to a heavenly mode of the energy cycle. The I Ching says heaven suspends its emblems. Tian suspends Yi. And the only way that a man may understand the symbols, the hexagrams of the I Ching, is to have a heavenly mind, a mind of heaven. So that the symbols, the hexagrams of the I Ching, are suspended in his mind, just as in reality they are suspended in heaven. And it is then with that capacity that the perfect man may then see how the hexagrams generate the world of 10,000 things. Let's take a break and we'll come back and continue from there. The Chinese culture has a form of primordiality built into it from Paleolithic times. The Paleolithic Chinese village was always 8 families gathered around a central well. So that if you put it into a diagram form, as I have in my book on the I Ching, you get a tic-tac-toe game with the central crosshatch occupied by the 0 and 8 X's around it. This 8-fold pattern, which can be seen, is held together by a 9th central part which is not seen, the well, the bindu. So that the Tao is not a concept of ideation to the Chinese, but has this Paleolithic primordiality of the place at which the nourishment is drawn out of the mysterious flow of water under the earth, up through the well, and nourishes the family. So that when dynastic China, about 3,700 years ago, when the Shang dynasty came into play in China, the central synthesizing medium was cast bronze, metal implements. And the central metal implement was called the ting, the cauldron. The cauldron, in a cultural circle, is what the well was in the agricultural level. So that the ting was the portable well. The ting where the food is cooked was the bindu. And so primordial is that today, anywhere in the world, the Chinese culture is held together by the meal. Chinese food is the true Taoist medium for Chinese culture. Not exercises. Chuangzi, 2,300 years ago, made fun of the pseudo-Taoists who would use movements that imitated storks and clouds and things to think that they understood Tao. It was already ridiculed 2,300 years ago. That's not it. That's not it at all. My spirit mother gave me 2 Chinese porcelain statues, one of a scholar and one of a farmer with the hoe. She said, this is the real Tai Chi, work and study. And when they are together, you're together. This is true. The Chinese, from a Paleolithic primordial experience, understand drawing commonly from the unknown. It's not an individual that draws from the unknown, but it's the fullness of the community together. It's the 8 families together that draw from the well. Then life is nourished. If one looks at the writings of Zhou Enlai, he is a wonderful 20th century Taoist. He's not a communist. My mentor Kaiyu Shu wrote a biography of Zhou Enlai and subtly showed the Taoist nature. Zhou Enlai was always second, never first. And yet within a year of Mao Zedong dying, Zhou Enlai's China was there. He bears the same relationship to Mao Zedong as Jefferson bore to Washington. True Taoist always lets someone else be the figurehead, but does the actual work that allows for nourishment for life to continue to happen, so that when the figureheads pass, life is still there. That's Tao. That's wisdom. That's understanding Athena. In order to bring together a whole year's worth, an annual cycle. Remember we talked this morning already, before the break, of how man does not make a ritual year circle. God does that. We maintain a linearity, and by our ritual dedication to maintain a linearity in nature, we experience that it comes full round. You see how it's always true, no matter on what level. It's always true. The saying is that a Taoist can be recognized because they have square pupils, because they see that the pairs of pairs are square. It means that pairedness has a power to it. 2 squared is the pair raised to another power. When you realize that 2 squared itself can be squared, then you have 2 to the 4th. 2 to the 4th is 16. And the 16 part, 2 squared squared, is the form of thought. Each moment of thought is a 16-part cycle, 8 parts of which are visible and objective, countable, and 8 parts always occur as a trill invisibly and are never countable, but are always there. That's the 0 and the 1. You can also, since we're talking about this, you can write 2 squared squared as 2 cubed. Because when you write 2 cubed is 8, and that's all that's ever objectively visible. And unspoken, unsaid, is the other 8, the pair to it. So the 8 trigrams of the I Ching are the entire scale of objective, visible existence in a universe where the other 8 are present and operative by their non-presence and non-operability. Therefore, Lao Tzu, my translation, chapter 14, Tao Te Ching, Praising the Profound. We started today with it. Let's come back. Notice that we come back. We come back because we are maintaining a linearity which is unwavering. I'm using a language and a thought form which is just like shooting an arrow. It's like Odysseus shooting an arrow through the 12 axe heads. Praising the profound, Lao Tzu. Looking itself, not seen, named thus colorless. Listening itself, not heard, named thus soundless. Grasping itself, not tenable, named thus incorporeal. These 3 themselves not can be subject objectivity. Therefore, twined yet busy unity, its surface not clear, its bottom not obscure, continuously, oh, not can name, reverts, returns to no thing, existence, this called no form itself, the form of no image itself, image. Thus, form, abstrusely abstruse. The front itself not seen its head, the rear itself not seen its back, holding fast ancient itself Tao, thereby govern now its existence. Thus no ancient beginning. This is called Tao's thread. The simple way of collapsing language to make it a saying is to say yin and yang hug each other so that they implode and there is no front and the backs disappear into mysterious wholeness. So that the Tai Chi is a symbol, includes this embracing. Lao Tzu says, yin and yang embrace and carry Tao upon their unity. That Tao, as we've talked about, does not register. Its registering is Te, oneness, unity, thusness. In Indian metaphysics, it was called Tathata, thusness. But thusness, using the Indian Tathata, thusness only can occur because non-thusness also occurs in its nonness. The only way a form can occur is that the background does not occur. That the background does not occur allows for the form to occur. And so form and background are a yin-yang. They're always together. Louis Sullivan told Frank Lloyd Wright once, looking over his desk when Wright was still a young, wild, errant genius, he said, Wright, behind every building you see is an architect you don't see. The egotistical architect tries to build himself. You just build the building and let yourself go, and you'll be there, behind the building. A true architect is the background which allows for the form of the building to occur. In that way, one is not building with materials, one is building with the nature of materials. And so, when Henry Hitchcock wanted to write a book about the mysterious Tao quality of Frank Lloyd Wright, he wrote a book called In the Nature of Material. Wright said when he understood what his teacher had said, he called him Lieber Meister, my beloved master, because he had been given something which ostensibly cannot be given. You only have it because you have accepted it out of yourself. And so a true teacher does not give you learning, but creates the conditions under which you teach yourself. That's the art of learning. Education is an art. It's a high art. And it has to do with the mystery of nature. So we begin with the mystery of nature, and we understand that its existential recording is an annual cycle on this planet, 365 and a quarter days. An annual cycle, which also has a lunar cycle. But that this circle of the seasons is the pattern upon which all ritual then is seen to have its fount. And from this, we understand that nature has a cycle. Nature has a circle. And so the circle of nature and the circle of ritual, when they're together, that's the chariot of the gods. When the wheel of nature and the wheel of ritual are together on the axle of our commitment, we may then drive in wisdom in our lives. Both the Katha Upanishad and Plato's dialogues record the same imagery, the same myth. So that last week we talked this way. Differentiation and averaging commute. It's a mathematical term. It means that they're interchangeable. It means that the interchangeability is such that they operate within each other's permutations and sets. For instance, 0 and infinity are commute in mathematics. Any way, anywhere that you can use 0, you can also use infinity. Differentiation and averaging as processes commute. Possibility keeps nature's matrix mysterious. No, that's not a sentiment. That's a law of physics. Possibility keeps nature's matrix mysterious. That while statistical differentiation is conscious and is thus a power, statistical distribution is mechanical, like a gas. And because of commutation being a ritual reciprocity, culture as a mirror focuses integrally on the distribution and yet numinously understands the differentiation. But the numerous differentiation cannot be present in culture. It has to be the invisible Great Spirit in the background. It has to be the other end of Tao. What did Jesus say? According to John, who was about 12 years old when he heard it from Jesus, the story about Nicodemus. He said metaphorically, the wind blows where it will, and no man knows where it came from or whence it goes. That's Jesus' Tao. That energy cycle occurs. That is for sure. Where it comes from and where it goes is specifically not determinable. Stronger, non-determinable. Determinability is not the criteria of the real. Long before determinability becomes even criterionable, to stretch English in a joyous way, long before the criterionability of determinability gets traction so that we can use it, nature already is trillions and trillions of aeons old. But integration, like differentiation, both modes are zero base. Whereas the zero base of integration is in nature, the zero base of differentiation is in the deep self, the mysterious soul. In a way, a true civilization is a consonance of the zero base soul, whereas a true culture is a consonance of zero base nature. They are an inverse relational pair. They go together. Self and cosmos go together. They always have gone together. There has never been a time, space, energy where they were not together. They are together. I remember one time in San Francisco in the 60s, there was a meeting in a big auditorium of the members of the Portola Institute who put out the first Whole Earth catalog, and they had a problem. So they wanted to have a town hall meeting to face the problem. The problem was we made too much money. So they had a roll, a wad of $100 bills like that. They passed it around the audience so everyone could feel and see the problem. It's making too much money. And no one took any of the money and returned the problem back whole. Because the understanding at that time, with that culture, was summed up in the great photo of Earth taken from space, new at that time. And the caption for the Whole Earth Catalog group was, "We can't put it together, it is together." And so the measurability of value by money hadn't even come into existence as a criterion of value on the level at which that population was operating. So we can say this: the true origin of differentiation is zero base. Thus, the field of consciousness is a play in the possibilities. To put it graphically, consciousness is an acrobat in the spaces and movements of the field of nature. To keep this trapeze quality of consciousness is all that human character can do. It keeps us busy. One of the great mathematicians of the 20th century, John van Neumann, in his Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, one of the great books of the 20th century, said at the beginning of chapter 7, "We are now in possession of a general theory of zero-sum n-person games." And from that came all of the developments of higher technology of the last 25, 35 years. It's very much a Tao. Very, very much a Tao. We can also say of the I Ching, the hexagram is the numinous form of elementary mysterious completeness. And that a hexagram is always, in terms of its integration, a pair of trigrams. But when we come to use the I Ching in terms of the I Ching, we cannot settle for a single hexagram. To use the I Ching as a book, to do a divination to find the hexagram, is a mark of egotistical stupidity. That's no way to use this. That's like using a Brancusi sculpture as a hammer. Shit, is what they say in Chicago. That's no way to do that. You need at least 5 hexagrams to make an energy cycle so that you can understand not only what the hexagram is, but its resonances. Because to a Taoist looking, one sees resonant intersections and not static things. The easiest way for us to tune ourselves to this is to begin pairing Thoreau with the I Ching. Now, you've taken a look at his essay called Walking in the Portable Thoreau, page 592 and following, and hopefully you've taken at least 2 walks. On New Year's Day, your first assignment was from wherever you live, take a walk and come back home. You can walk any which way and return home. That path, that cycle of that walk, was to have been just simply recorded. The second assignment, the second project, the pair to that was to take that walk again, but this time with a single natural image keying what happens in the walk. So that with those 2 walks, you now have a pair of walks differentiated only by a single image, one image only, one ping only. Because we're trying to communicate with the mysteriousness not only out there, but in here. And that mysteriousness out there is not going to be able to resonate with that mysteriousness in here as long as there's a veil in between. We can't roll up the veil like a window shade. You can if you're a super yogi, be my guest. But we can, through education like this, bring it down to a single image, not a single point. That takes a lot of learning. But we can bring it down to a single image. And we can do that by cutting a diagonal across 100 years of life experience in just 2 weeks by taking 2 walks separated only by a single image, single natural image. Air, earth, water, fire, ether, whatever you want. Now, if you didn't do that, then you didn't get anywhere, right? If you didn't do those 2 walks, then you're just where you were. What does Buckaroo Banzai say? Wherever you go, there you are. Well, you don't want Dr. Lizardo to get away with all that stuff, do you? So get yourself together and take a walk. Then take the second walk, give it at least a day in between, taking 1 image with you. Now the third walk is to take a different image with you. Now when you have 2 differentiations on a common theme, when you have 2 vectors that meet on a common theme within the same field, you then have a mathematical form possible called a tensor. Now you don't need to know mathematics or mathematical analysis. All you have to do is just do this. Would you do it? That's the ancient Mideast way of saying. It doesn't translate, it just means take your walks. In Thoreau, who is a pair to the I Ching, the pair to walking is a little bit called a winter walk, which Emerson published in a magazine that the Transcendentalists put out in the United States called The Dial. Here's some excerpts. Let's try and hear Thoreau as an American Taoist. A winter walk. The wind has gently murmured through the blinds, or puffed with feathery softness against the windows, and occasionally sighed like a summer zephyr, lifting the leaves along the livelong night. The meadow mouse has slept in his snug gallery in the sod. The owl has sat in a hollow tree in the depth of the swamp. The rabbit, the squirrel, and the fox have all been housed. The watchdog has lain quiet on the hearth, and the cattle have stood silent in their stalls. The earth itself has slept, as it were its first, not its last sleep, save when some street sign or woodhouse door has faintly creaked upon its hinge, cheering forlorn nature at her midnight work. The only sound awake twixt Venus and Mars, advising us of a remote inward warmth, a divine cheer and fellowship, where gods are met together, but where it is very bleak for men to stand. But while the earth has slumbered, all the air has been alive, with feathery flakes descending, as if some northern Ceres reigned, showering her silvery grain over the fields. We sleep and at length awake to the still reality of a winter morning. You still think it's corn pone? You going to buy your Thoreau? A little later on. There is a slumbering subterranean fire in nature which never goes out and which no cold can chill. It finally melts the great snow, and in January or July is only buried under a thicker or thinner cover. In the coldest day, it flows somewhere, and the snow melts around every tree. This field of winter rye, which sprouted late in the fall and now speedily dissolves the snow, and where the fire is very thinly covered, we feel warmed by it. In the winter, warmth stands for all virtue, and we resort in thought to a trickling spill, with its bare stones shining in the sun, and to warm springs in the woods with as much eagerness as rabbits and robins. What fire could ever equal the sunshine of a winter's day, when the meadow mouse comes out by the wall sides and the chickadee lisps in the defiles of the wood? The warmth comes directly from the sun and is not radiated from the earth as in summer, and when we feel his beams on our backs as we are treading some snowy dell, we are grateful as for a special kindness, and bless the sun which has followed us into that by-place. This subterranean fire has its altar in each man's breast. For in the coldest day, and on the bleakest hill, this traveler cherishes a warmth, fire within the folds of his cloak, not kindled in any hearth. A healthy man indeed is the complement of the seasons, and in winter, summer, is in his heart. There is the south. Thither have all birds and insects migrated. Around the warm springs in his breast are gathered the robin and the lark. At length, having reached the edge of the woods and shut out the gadding town, we enter within their covert as we go under the roof of a cottage and cross its threshold, all ceilinged and banked up with snow. They are glad and warm still, and as genial and cheery in winter as in summer, as we stand in the midst of the pines in the flickering and checkered light, which straggles but little way into their maze. We wonder if the towns have ever heard this simple story. So when you see books published in India dedicated to the sage of North America, an American Upanishad, that's it. Right there. Now when you pair, like a tuning fork, Thoreau and the I Ching, and strike that by your activity of bringing it together, putting it into your life, you've got a deck of cards that you can divine not only where you are, but where you are is. That's what this education is about. Now we've got a recording of the original Greek of Homer. And we're going to play a little bit of the cassette. But first I want to bring in just a few lines from the Odyssey. To synthesize this first year, I want you to read little tiny sections of the the Odyssey or Moby Dick. Little tiny sections. Don't read ahead, don't read behind. This is like the Moshe Feldenkrais exercise that he developed in the concentration camps. That if you do a complete pattern, momentarily by momentarily, you restore health. Or the Bach flower remedies. If you take just a little bit of essence, you get a tremendous effect. Why? Because the mysteriousness of nature is for us to maintain linearity, and if you can do it one atom at a time, the effect is the same as if you smashed your way through with the front line of the bills. It's the same effect. So one can afford to be elegant in this universe. It works just as well as being a swordsman. Remember Chuang-Tzu's butcher, whose knife never touches the bone of the sinew, never needs sharpening. Here's Homer. Here's how the Odyssey begins. Richmond Lattimore's great translation. Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways, who was driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Many were they whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of. Many the pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. Even so, he could not save his companions, hard though he strove to. They were destroyed by their own wild recklessnesses. Fools who devoured the oxen of Helios, the sun god, and he took away the day of their homecoming. From some point here, goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak and begin our story. And in this way, Homer brings together of vanishing points and lets the gray-eyed goddess Athena look through the hole that he has made in the world with his language form. And her wind of wisdom flows through, and that's the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a feminine journey, whereas Moby Dick is a masculine journey. This is a woman's annual cycle, whereas Melville is a masculine annual cycle. Take it in little tiny Feldenkrais movements, and it will have an efficacy beyond that literary critics dream of. The power of Homer is that he made a whole culture transform into a civilization. Homer was a large part of a culture that listened to him. But when the listening became differentiated into a doing of conscious listening, it transformed into a civilization. Within 1 year of making Homer the basis of education in Athens, Solon and Pisistratus, within one generation of that, you had people like Aeschylus, and Sophocles, Thucydides, Socrates, Pindar. Greek civilization came into being. There's all the difference in the world between a culture and a civilization. It's how you are able to take something and go with it. The whole first year is learning how to accept a field of inquiry that I keep enriching beyond your capacity to outdistance. I love it for you to try an end run. Come on. Here's my chest. Climb on. And that field of inquiry, as it keeps enriching and enriching and enriching and outstripping, eventually becomes appreciated. We learn to cherish that which we can't finally manipulate. And when we cherish, at that very instant, the mysteriousness of it all occurs to us. And we realize we didn't have to control it. It's not anything that needs to be controlled. It's a field of adventure and not some kind of real estate land deal. You don't need a portfolio. All you need is to go. I think the American phrase was zippity-doo-dah. That's enough.